For 4 years, nobody could make the Brandt organ sing again. 4 years. 3 restoration specialists flown in from Montreal, one from Halifax, one from as far as Stuttgart, Germany. $62,000 spent on consultations, replacement parts, custom-ordered bellows components that arrived in wooden crates and left in the same wooden crates unused. The pipe organ at St. Marguerite's had stood silent since the ice storm of 2019 took out the power for 11 days and did something to the electrical relay system that no one could explain and no one could fix. And on the gray Tuesday afternoon, when everything changed, the man who finally solved what 5 certified specialists could not was the one who cleaned the gutters twice a year and plowed the church parking lot every winter for a flat rate of $200. His name was Bennett Chair. He ran a small garage on the edge of Harlow, Ontario. A town of 4,000 people with 1 traffic light and 2 Tim Hortons, both of which were busier than they had any right to be. The garage had been his father's before it was his, and before that it had been a grain storage building that his grandfather converted with his own hands during the summer of 1961. The sign above the door still said Chair and Son, which people sometimes read as his own business name and sometimes asked about the son part, and Bennett always said, yes, he was working on it, and smiled in the way that meant the subject was closed. He had a daughter named Wren. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's habit of going quiet when something was bothering her. She did her homework on the workbench in the garage most afternoons, her backpack propped against a stack of oil filters, her pencil moving steadily across the page while Bennett worked 2 bays over. She had strong opinions about restaurant soup. Too salty, always, and she could identify the make and model of most vehicles by sound alone, which she'd learned without meaning to, simply by being in the garage long enough. Her mother had died when Wren was 2. Her name was Dana, and she had been a quiet, exact person who loved crossword puzzles and early mornings and had made Bennett a better version of himself in ways he was still discovering years later in the gap she left behind. Bennett didn't talk about Dana much, not because the grief had passed. It hadn't, not fully, not in the way people sometimes implied it would, but because some things felt private in the particular way that matters most. The kind you keep not out of shame, but out of care. He kept her photograph on the shelf above his workbench, behind the socket wrench set, where he could see it without looking like he was looking at it. Catherine Brandt had inherited the pipe organ from her grandmother. That was the correct way to put it, technically. The organ had been commissioned by her grandmother, Marguerite Brandt, in 1958 and installed in the church that the Brandt family had attended for 3 generations. When the church restructured in 2011 and the congregation merged with a larger parish 6 kilometers away, Catherine's grandmother had purchased the organ outright rather than let it be auctioned. She moved it to the main hall of the Brandt property, a large heritage home on the edge of town, built in the 1890s, that the family had maintained without apology through various economic climates, and had it installed there, where it occupied the better part of 1 wall and required its own dedicated electrical infrastructure. Marguerite had died in 2017. Catherine had inherited everything. The house, the grounds, the 2 outbuildings, the 1962 Jaguar E-Type that sat under a canvas cover in the garage and hadn't run in a decade, and the organ that had been, in her grandmother's own words, the most honest thing in the room. Catherine was 41. She ran the Regional Arts Foundation that her grandmother had established, a role that suited her in most ways and exhausted her in the others. She was precise and direct in the way that sometimes read as cold to people who didn't know her well, and warm in the particular way of people who have learned to be careful about where they direct it. She had never married. She had never been certain that was the wrong choice, though she examined it sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the house settled around her and felt its size. After the ice storm of 2019, she had called the first restoration specialist within a month. A man named Picard from Montreal, who came with a junior colleague, and spent 4 days in the main hall before delivering a report that she understood approximately 40% of. They said the fault was electrical. It was always electrical. But the organ system, modified from its original pneumatic configuration in 1974 by a technician whose records no longer existed, had a diagnostic profile that the standard tools read as clean, which meant The actual problem was somewhere the tools weren't looking. She paid Picard's invoice and called someone else. By year 3, 5 separate specialists had come and gone. The best of them, a German engineer named Vogel, whom a colleague at a Berlin Arts Foundation had recommended as the finest living expert on mid-century European pipe organ electrification, spent 9 days in the house and left on a Sunday morning with the specific expression of a man who respected the problem too much to pretend he'd solved it. He called her from the road. The system has been modified in ways that don't appear in any of the documentation, he said. His English was careful and precise. Whoever did the 1974 conversion knew what they were doing, but they created a configuration that standard diagnostics simply cannot read correctly. It sees normal function where there is a fault. The fault is real. I can confirm that much. I cannot find it. She thanked him and paid him and sat in the main hall for a long time after he left, looking at the organ the way you look at something that has become more symbol than object, something that carries a weight beyond its physical fact. Her grandmother had played it every Sunday morning for 31 years. Not professionally, not for an audience, just for herself, and occasionally for whoever happened to be in the house, which in Catherine's childhood meant Catherine, sitting on the bench beside her grandmother's hip, watching her hands move across the keys with the unhurried certainty of someone engaged in private conversation. The cost of the failed repairs had reached $62,000 by year 4. That was not, for Catherine, a sum that created practical difficulty. The Brandt Foundation was well funded, and her own finances were comfortable. But the money was not the point, and had never been the point. The point was that she had promised her grandmother's memory something she had not been able to deliver. And there was a particular quality to that failure, private and persistent, that no professional framing could soften. Bennett Scher came to the Brandt property every autumn to clear the eave strews. He had been doing it for 6 years, since Catherine's estate manager had called the garage looking for someone reliable. And Bennett had shown up on a Monday in October with his extension ladder and his worn leather gloves and done the job thoroughly and without conversation, which Catherine had appreciated enough to call him back the following year. She knew his name from the invoice. She registered him the way you register reliable tradespeople: present, professional, easy to overlook. In 6 years, they had exchanged perhaps 40 words in total. On the October afternoon that changed things, Bennett was descending the ladder along the east side of the house when the wind shifted and he caught, from the open transom window above the main hall, a sound. Not music. Something smaller than that. A single note, low and unresolved, the way a pipe organ sounds when someone presses a key without engaging the bellows, just the mechanical click of the action, followed by silence. He stopped on the ladder. The sound came again. Then Catherine's voice, flat and quiet, saying something he couldn't hear. He descended the ladder and stood on the gravel path for a moment. Then he walked to the main entrance and knocked. She answered after a pause, still holding a sheaf of papers, clearly in the middle of something. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I heard something from the hall window. The organ?" She looked at him. "Yes. Is it the one that's been giving you trouble?" She was quiet for a moment. "You know about that?" "It's a small town," he said, not unkindly. She stepped back from the door. "Come in if you want to look. I don't know why I'm saying that. Everyone who's looked at it has left without solving it." He followed her into the main hall. The organ was larger than he'd expected, an imposing instrument along the north wall, the pipes arranged in a fan above the manual keyboards, the wood of the case a dark walnut that had been refinished at some point in the past decade. He walked towards slowly and stood in front of it for a moment without touching anything. "What does it do?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "That's the problem. It should start. The electrical system runs, the blower activates, but when you engage the action, nothing. No sound from the pipes." He crouched and looked along the lower casework without touching it. He had the specific posture of someone who was looking at a system rather than a component, head tilted, eyes moving in a pattern that wasn't random. "What year was it modified?" he asked. She looked at him carefully. 1974. "How did you know it was modified?" "The relay configuration on the lower chassis doesn't match the rest of it." He stood up. "The upper system is original pneumatic. The lower coupling is electrical, added later. That junction is where your problem is." She was still looking at him with the expression of someone who has just been told something they recognize as true but cannot yet place. "You know organ electrification," she said. "I know systems integration," he said. He straightened his jacket and looked at the organ again. "If you want, I can take a look. I can't promise anything, but I'd like to try." There was something in the plainness of the offer that made it different from the way specialists made offers. They promised careful analysis and professional assessment. He said, "I'd like to try," with the same tone he would have used to say he could look at a leaky faucet. She said yes, without knowing exactly why. He came back on Saturday morning before 7. His daughter was with him. A small girl with a rust-colored winter hat pulled down over her ears and a backpack that appeared to contain a library. She stood in the main hall doorway and looked at the organ with the particular intensity of a child who has learned not to touch things without asking. "This is Wren," Bennett said. "She'll be quiet. She has homework." "I'm always quiet," Wren said, which was offered not as a protest but as factual clarification. Catherine looked at the girl. "How old are you?" 9. She considered Catherine with her mother's dark eyes. "Do you live here by yourself?" "Wren," Bennett said. "I'm just asking." "It's all right," Catherine said. "Yes, I do." Wren absorbed this. "It's a big house," she said. Then she took her backpack to the carved wooden bench along the east wall, settled in with the practiced ease of a child accustomed to working in adult spaces, and opened her notebook. Bennett worked for 4 hours that first morning. He didn't use diagnostic equipment, at least not initially. He moved through the organ's lower casework with the unhurried focus that Catherine had not seen in any of the previous specialists. They had worked with tablets and testing kits and reference documents. He worked with his hands and his eyes, and a small LED torch he held in his teeth while he looked at things. She stayed in the hall. She had told herself she had work to do there. This was true, but it was not the reason she stayed. He had a way of working that was difficult to name precisely. Not slow, exactly, but unhurried in a way that felt substantive rather than performative. He didn't talk to himself or react audibly to what he found. He looked at the system the way someone looks at something they are trying to understand as a whole rather than parse as individual pieces. At one point, Wren looked up from her notebook, watched him for a moment, and said, "Dad, is this like the Callahan transmission?" Bennett made a sound of agreement without turning around. "What's the Callahan transmission?" Catherine asked. Wren turned back to her notebook. "Dad fixed something nobody could fix for 2 years. It was a truck," the owner cried. "Grown men cry in our garage sometimes," she added, with neither judgment nor particular interest. Then she returned to her work. Catherine found herself unexpectedly smiling. The way you smile when something catches you off guard, the kind of smile that happens before you decide whether you mean it. She meant it. The first day ended without a resolution. Bennett wiped his hands on a shop rag, collected his tools with the same care he'd taken arriving, and looked at Wren. "Pack up," he said. "Did you find it?" she asked. "Not yet." "How many more days?" "I'm not sure yet." Wren zipped her backpack with the calm acceptance of someone accustomed to things taking as long as they take. She had her mother's patience, Bennett had often thought, and her mother's way of meeting facts without drama. Catherine walked them to the door. "Same time Sunday?" she asked. She hadn't planned to say it that way. She had planned to say, "Let me know if you'd like to continue." But what came out was same time Sunday, like it was already decided. "If you don't mind the early hour," he said. She did not mind the early hour. She stood in the door after their car. An old Subaru wagon, with a cracked rear taillight and approximately 3 years' worth of hockey equipment in the back, pulled out of the drive, and she thought about the expression on his face when she described the 1974 modification, the way his eyes had moved. Recognition, quiet and immediate. Not the recognition of someone following a diagnostic protocol. Something more direct than that. She had called her colleague at the Berlin Foundation after Vogel's visit 3 years prior and said, "I don't know what else to do." And her colleague had said, "The problem is everyone's looking for the same thing, the fault that makes sense on paper. Sometimes the thing doesn't make sense on paper and you need someone who works from a different angle." She thought about that now. He found it on the 4th day. She was not in the hall when it happened. She was upstairs in the study, dealing with correspondence about the Foundation's spring programming. Correspondence that had been waiting for a week because she had been, she admitted to herself, spending more time in the main hall than was strictly necessary. The sound came through the floor and through the walls and through the old plaster ceiling of the study and into her chest like something physical. The organ breathed. That was the only word for it. Not a chord, not a song, a single sustained note from the lowest register, the kind of sound that pipe organs make when they are first repressurized after silence. A sound with weight and resonance, and what she could only describe as presence. She set her pen down on the desk. She did not run. She was not by nature a person who ran toward things, but she moved quickly enough that she was slightly out of breath when she came through the study door and down the main staircase and into the hall. Bennett was standing at the side of the organ with his arms crossed, looking at it. He had the expression of a man watching something he has been waiting to confirm. Not triumph, not the face of a person expecting applause. Something quieter, the particular relief of someone for whom the problem was real, and the resolution is therefore real in equal measure. Wren had come in from wherever she'd been, the kitchen, where Mrs. Beaumont, the house's part-time housekeeper, had apparently been feeding her biscuits for the past 40 minutes. She stood in the hall doorway, in her socks, holding a pencil, looking at the organ. "You did it," she said. "It responded," he said. He was careful about the distinction. The note held for another moment, then settled. Catherine stood in the middle of the hall and felt the sound's absence more acutely than she had felt it when it had never been there at all. Because now she knew what it was supposed to be. She pressed her hand flat against the side of the case. The wood was faintly warm from the blower's operation. She kept her hand there. She was not going to cry. She had told herself this approximately 6 times in the past 4 years, in different configurations and with varying levels of success. She did not succeed now either. It was not performative, and it was not something she had any interest in explaining. It simply happened the way things happen when you've been holding something at a particular tension for a very long time, and it releases. Bennett did not say anything. He did not perform discomfort or offer the verbal fillers that people offer when someone else's emotion arrives unexpectedly in a shared space. He let it be there. He stood a few feet away with his arms loosely crossed and looked at the organ, and the courtesy of that, the specific courtesy of not making her embarrassment part of the moment, was something she did not know how to name immediately. Mrs. Beaumont appeared in the hall doorway, took in the situation with the experienced tact of someone who has managed a household for a long time, ushered Wren quietly back toward the kitchen, and disappeared. Eventually, Catherine sat on the bench along the east wall, the one where Wren did her homework. She sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and breathed until the breathing was normal again. Bennett sat on a wooden stool he'd pulled from beside the lower casework, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to signal indifference. He had found a middle distance that managed to be both respectful and present. "I'm sorry," she said. "That wasn't. You've been waiting 4 years," he said. "It seems like a reasonable reaction." He turned a cloth over in his hands. He looked at the organ. "My wife died," he said. "Wren was too. I was at the hospital. I'd left to get some things she'd asked for. A phone charger and her good pillow from home. When I came back to the parking garage, something had already happened and I knew it, somehow, before anyone told me. I sat in the car for a while. I don't know how long. I didn't particularly care that other people could see." He said it the way he said most things, without the framing of a person who has prepared the story for public consumption. Just a fact, delivered plainly, which made it land differently than it would have if he'd been careful about it. Catherine looked at him. "Her name," she said. "Your wife." Something shifted in his face. "Not many people ask that first," he said. "I know. People step around it. Dana," he said. "Her name was Dana. That's a good name." "Yeah." He looked at the organ. She would have thought this was something. He paused. She liked old things, things that had been around long enough to have opinions about themselves. Catherine felt the sentence settle somewhere. "The organ has opinions," she said. "That's what took me so long to find the fault. I had to let it tell me what it was doing wrong instead of looking for what I expected it to be doing wrong." She was quiet for a moment. The hall was warm, the blower still running at low pressure. There was a particular quality to the air in the room that had not been there for 4 years, something alive in it. "How did you find it?" she asked. He leaned forward, slightly, elbows on his knees. The 1974 modification created a relay coupling between the pneumatic primary and the electrical secondary that the original technician hid inside the original casework. It's not in any documentation because there's no documentation. This was a custom job. The relay contact developed a specific resistance pattern over 50 years. Not a break, not a short. Just enough degradation that under certain humidity and temperature conditions, the primary signal can't complete the handoff to the secondary. She looked at him. Humidity. Autumn, specifically. When the house transitions from the warm season humidity profile to the cold season profile, the relay material contracts just enough that the resistance spikes past the tolerance threshold. The diagnostic tools read the electrical system as functional because the system is functional. They weren't testing the junction itself because the junction wasn't visible. It was behind the original casework, hidden in a way that made sense in 1974 and made no sense to anyone reading the system today. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. How did you know to look there? I wasn't looking for a fault, he said. I was looking at how the whole system communicated with itself. She looked at him with the careful expression of someone filing something away. You used to do something other than eavesdrews, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Yes. The full story came out over 3 days, not all at once and not in one conversation. It came out the way things come out when two people are spending time in the same space around a shared problem, and the pretense of not knowing each other starts to wear through. He had spent 12 years as a senior integration engineer at a firm in Waterloo that contracted with automotive and industrial systems manufacturers. His specialty was the junction between legacy and modern systems. The engineering problem of making old technology communicate with new, or making custom modifications speak to original architecture. He was, by any reasonable measure, very good at it. He had left the industry when Ren was 3. Not dramatically, not because of any single event. He had taken a leave, and the leave had extended, and at some point the extension became permanent by default rather than by decision. He had discovered, without planning to, that the garage could be managed on a schedule that kept Ren's life stable, and that the work engaged enough of his brain to prevent the kind of vacant stillness he'd found unbearable in the early months after Dana. He was not, he said, unhappy with the choice. He said this without the performance of someone trying to convince either Catherine or himself. He said it the way he said most things, as an accurate statement. He did not tell her she should have hired him differently, or that the situation reflected poorly on her, or anything of that nature. He simply told her the shape of it when she asked, and she asked carefully, the way she did things. You've been 3 kilometers from this house, she said on the 3rd morning, while they were both standing in the hall looking at the organ, which she had played for approximately 4 minutes the evening before. Just one piece. A simple melody, both hands halting. She had not played in years. You've been 3 kilometers away for 6 years, she said, and I handed you a check for gutter work and said thank you and watched you leave. That's how it works, he said. No judgment in it. It shouldn't be how it works. He looked at her. He had the expression of someone who has thought about this at length, in private, and arrived at a position that is neither bitterness nor acceptance, but something more complicated than either. I made choices that made me invisible in a particular way, he said. I don't entirely regret them. Ren's doing well. She can name every engine variant of the original Mini Cooper, which is not a skill she acquired at school. Catherine thought about this for a moment. Then she said, I'd like to talk to you about the Jaguar. He looked at her. The E-Type in the outbuilding, she said. It hasn't run in 12 years. I've had 2 people look at it and neither of them knew what they were doing. I'm beginning to think I have a pattern. The corner of his mouth moved again, more definitely this time. What year? Flat floor. Series 1. He was quiet for a moment. He had the expression she was beginning to recognize. Not excitement, but a kind of focused alertness, the settling of attention onto something that matched the shape of what he understood. I can take a look, he said. The story got out on a Wednesday. Not through the press. Harlow didn't have a paper anymore, only a community Facebook group that had the reach of a newspaper without the editorial oversight. A photo appeared on the group. The main hall at the Brandt house, the organ in the background. Catherine standing beside it with her hands at her sides. The caption read, Brandt organ fixed after 4 years. The guy who cleans the gutters figured it out. By Thursday morning it had been shared 218 times, which in a town of 4,000 was effectively everyone who had a Facebook account, and several people who didn't but whose neighbors read it to them over coffee. By Thursday afternoon, a journalist from the regional paper in Barrie had emailed Catherine's foundation office asking for comment. By Friday, a blog post appeared, written by someone in the organ restoration community who had done the research, that identified Bennett Chair, his 12 years at the Waterloo firm, his published technical contributions to 2 industry papers on legacy system integration, and the specific irony of the situation, which the blogger handled with restraint but did not elide. Catherine read the post on Friday evening, sitting at her kitchen table with tea she forgot to drink. The blogger had written carefully and without embellishment. She found this worse, somehow, than embellishment would have been. The plain facts were sufficient. She texted Bennett. Not a long message. I've seen the blog post. I'm sorry this is moving faster than either of us intended. Don't feel obligated to respond to anything this weekend. His reply came quickly. Wren found the Facebook post this morning, she said, and I quote, "Now people know who we are." She stared at the message. What did you tell her? She typed, that knowing who we are doesn't change who we are. A pause. She said that was very dad of me. Catherine set her phone down and looked at her kitchen and thought about that for a while. He came Monday morning. Alone, Wren was in school, 3rd week of a science project that had apparently taken on a life of its own, something involving the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies and a scale model that had colonized the kitchen table at home. Catherine met him at the door rather than having Mrs. Beaumont show him in, which she had briefly considered and then dismissed as the kind of formality that would have felt wrong. He looked, she thought, like someone who had not slept especially well since Wednesday. She did not say so. She brought him to the kitchen. Mrs. Beaumont had made breakfast before Catherine had thought to specify anything. Eggs, toast, strong coffee, a bowl of fruit that Wren would have approved of unreservedly. Bennett sat at the kitchen table and looked at the spread with the particular expression of a man who is trying to remember the last time someone made him breakfast and arriving at an answer that is further back than he'd like. You didn't have to do this, he said. I know, she said. He poured his coffee and held it in both hands, which she had noticed was how he held it when he was thinking. She had noticed a number of his small habits over the past 2 weeks. This concerned her slightly, in the way that attention concerns you when you realize it has been happening without permission. I want to talk to you about something, she said. Formally. Or as formally as this gets. She looked at the kitchen, which is apparently not very formal. He waited. The Brandt Foundation runs an applied arts and heritage technology program, she said. It's smaller than the main programming. It was something my grandmother wanted as part of the mandate, the preservation and repair of heritage instruments and installations. It is currently, she paused, understaffed in a way that I have been not addressing for 2 years. He was listening with his full attention, which was a specific kind of attention, the kind that didn't perform itself. I want to offer you a consulting position within that program, she said, not because of what happened this month, or not only because of that. Because the work that program does, identifying failures in legacy systems that current diagnostic methods can't locate, is precisely the intersection of what you know how to do. He set his coffee down. It's part-time initially, she said, structured around your garage and around Wren's schedule, which I would like written into whatever arrangement we make. Not as a nicety, as a term. I've had enough experience with terms that exist on paper and are quietly penalized in practice. I won't operate that way. He looked at her with the careful expression he used when he was deciding how much of a response to offer. What does the work actually involve? He asked. Consultations on heritage instrument restorations, assessment of systems that conventional specialists can't diagnose, occasional travel for evaluation, but nothing that would require extended absence. She looked at the table. And the Jaguar, she added, as a starting point, if you're willing. Why the Jaguar specifically? Because it belonged to my grandmother, and because I have watched it sit under a canvas cover for 12 years, and I think it is time. There was something in that, something she hadn't intended to say that plainly and then had anyway. He heard it. Is it something she drove, he asked, every summer until she was 78? She would have found it embarrassing that I've let it sit. Bennett was quiet for a moment. He looked at the kitchen window, then back at her. I'd need to know the arrangement is real, he said. Not in an adversarial way. I've spent 6 years making choices around Wren's stability. I can't undo that for something provisional. It's real, Catherine said. I'll put it in writing and I'll have you talk to the foundation's solicitor directly if that's useful. The question is whether you want to do the work. He was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen held it. Outside through the window, the maples along the drive were past their peak, going thin and brown in the November morning. The sky was the particular gray of southern Ontario in autumn, flat and close, the kind of gray that settles in around Thanksgiving and doesn't fully lift until April. I need to talk to Wren, he said. Of course. She'll want to know about her Friday afternoons, he said. She has swimming Fridays. The arrangement would not affect Fridays. He looked at her. She's going to ask if she can still come here sometimes. She liked it here. Catherine looked at him. She's welcome any time she wants to come. He nodded once. Then he said, I'll call you by end of week. He called on Thursday. Wren had apparently asked 2 questions. First, would she still get biscuits from Mrs. Beaumont? Second, did Bennett actually want to do this, or did he feel like he should? He told Catherine he had answered, yes, yes, and both. Both? Catherine said. Both things can be true at the same time, he said. You can want something and feel the pull of the right thing simultaneously. I told her they weren't in conflict. She said, okay. Then she asked if they could get a better toaster, he added. Ours burns on the left side. Catherine looked at the ceiling briefly. Done, she said. He started in December. The Jaguar came first. He had the canvas cover off within 20 minutes of arriving at the outbuilding, and he stood looking at it for a long time without speaking. The car was the color of British racing green, and even under the accumulated dust of 12 idle years it had a particular quality, the quality of objects that were made with excessive and slightly unnecessary care and have retained it against all odds. He began with a full systems inventory, not diagnosis, inventory. What was there? What was original? What had been modified and when? Wren came on the first Saturday. She sat on an upturned crate in the corner of the outbuilding with her notebook and her pencil and her current novel, and she observed the operation with the calm familiarity of a child who had spent most of her life doing exactly this in different configurations. At one point she set her book down and asked Catherine, who was standing in the outbuilding doorway with a cup of tea and no real reason to be there except that she was, "Is it like the organ?" "What do you mean?" Catherine asked. "Something that looks like one problem but is actually a different problem," Wren said. "Dad finds those." "He does," Catherine said. "He found Dana's problems too," Wren said, without looking up from her notebook. "Before." Catherine was very still. "She had problems?" she asked carefully. "She was sick," Wren said. "Dad found out what it was when the doctors didn't." She paused. "He couldn't fix it, though. He said it's different, knowing and fixing." She returned to her novel. Catherine looked at Bennett, who had not turned around and was examining a section of the Jaguar's wiring loom with his small torch. His shoulders were level. His hands were steady. She understood then, something she had not quite understood before. Why he had stayed in the garage, why Harlow, why the schedule, the predictability, the deliberate plainness of the life he'd constructed. Not because he lacked ambition, because he had learned in the specific way that only a particular kind of loss teaches you what was load-bearing and what wasn't. And he had kept the load-bearing things and let the rest go with the practical grace of someone who has done a structural assessment and knows which walls to knock out and which to leave standing. She went back inside. She stood in the main hall and looked at the organ. She sat down on the bench, not Wren's bench, the player's bench, and rested her hands on the keys without pressing them. The ivory was cool under her palms. She stayed there for a while. The arrangement grew in the way that arrangements do when they are based on something real. Not quickly, not with announcements. Gradually, in the way of seasons. By February, Bennett was consulting on 2 additional restoration projects through the foundation. Victorian-era mechanical clock in a heritage building in Collingwood and a 1940s radio broadcasting console at a museum in Owen Sound that had baffled 2 electronic specialists for the better part of a year. He found the clock's fault in 3 days. The radio console took 2 weeks and required a custom-fabricated component that he designed himself, on paper, at Catherine's kitchen table, while Wren did her reading homework across from him and occasionally asked questions about what he was drawing. He kept the garage. He was not ready to close it, and he didn't think of himself as being ready in any foreseeable timeline. The garage was his father's and his grandfather's, and it smelled like motor oil and cold air and decades of solved problems, and he found he could not reduce that to a practical calculation. He reduced the hours and hired a part-time mechanic named Fern, who was 26 and considerably more efficient than Bennett had been at that age, and who took to Wren immediately, which settled the question. Wren came to the Brandt house on Saturdays. This had not been negotiated or scheduled. It had simply happened, by incremental decision, the way most of the meaningful things seemed to happen. She had a library card for the second-floor library now, or Catherine's version of a library card, which was Catherine saying, "The library is yours. Take whatever you want." Wren took this seriously. She treated the library with the considered reverence of a person who has been given access to something that matters and understands what that means. Mrs. Beaumont made whatever requested on Saturdays. The list had included, over the preceding months, tomato soup with no cream in it, grilled cheese with 3 kinds of cheese, which Mrs. Beaumont had executed with the dignified competence of someone who does not find reasonable requests beneath them, pancakes, in February on no particular occasion, and once, memorably, a request for the kind of eggs you make in a ring, which turned out to mean eggs cooked in a cookie cutter in the shape of a star, which Mrs. Beaumont had sourced a cookie cutter for without comment. Catherine had saved that one. Not on her phone, not formally. She had simply noted it and found it returning to her at intervals, the way small things do when they are attached to something larger. The Jaguar started on a Saturday in March. Bennett had spent 11 weeks on it. The fault had been, as with the organ, a question of hidden modification. A previous owner in the 1980s had installed a non-original ignition system that had been wired into the original loom in a way that was invisible to anyone who didn't know to look at the junction rather than the components. The junction had been corroding for 40 years in a way that was not quite corrosion, a slow, specific oxidation pattern that only manifested under cold start conditions, which was why it had never been found in the shop. He found it on a Wednesday. He spent 2 more days confirming and completing the repair. On Saturday morning he brought Wren, and Catherine was in the kitchen when she heard the sound from the outbuilding, a sound she had not heard in 12 years, the particular sound of a 4.2-liter straight-six engine finding itself again after a long enforced silence. She set her coffee down on the counter without looking at where she was setting it. It did not go on the counter. It went on the edge of the counter. She heard it hit the floor, and she did not stop to clean it up. The outbuilding was cold, the March air still carrying the particular bite of a winter that isn't quite finished, but the engine was running, idling at a low resonant frequency that Catherine felt through the soles of her shoes on the concrete floor. Bennett was standing beside the car with his arms at his sides, not crossed, something slightly more open than his usual posture. Wren was in the doorway wrapped in her coat with her hat pulled down, watching her father with the expression she got when she was proud of him, and hadn't decided yet whether to say so. "You did it again," she said finally. "The car helped," he said. She rolled her eyes in the manner of someone who finds this kind of modesty charming and slightly exhausting in equal measure. Catherine stood at the outbuilding doorway and looked at the Jaguar, running, warm-colored in the March morning light that came through the slatted windows. She thought about her grandmother, driving it through the summer roads. She thought about the particular stubbornness of things that are made well, how they retain the intention of their making even when they are broken, even when they are silent for years, even when the people who knew how to use them are gone. She did not cry this time, not because it was less than the organ, but because something was different now. There was less of the 4-year held tension in it. There was more of something else. She walked to the driver's side of the Jaguar and opened the door. The smell rose to meet her. Leather and old oil and the particular atmospheric quality of a car that has been cared for over a long time by people who knew what care meant. She sat in the driver's seat. Bensat stood a few feet back. He did not fill the moment with words. "She drove it," Wren said, "about the grandmother, intuiting correctly without being told. Didn't she?" "Every summer," Catherine said. "She should be able to again," Wren said. She directed this at the car, not at either of the adults present, in the philosophical manner of a child who has absorbed more of adult life than anyone thought to notice. Catherine looked at the steering wheel under her hands. The Jaguar's wheel was smaller than she'd expected, more intimate. She was aware of the engine's vibration coming up through the seat. "She should," she said. She looked at Bennett. Will you come? She hadn't planned to say that either. But she had, and it was the right thing to have said. She knew it immediately. He got in the passenger side. Wren stood in the outbuilding doorway and watched them pull out into the lane with the expression of a person who understands more than she is indicating, and is choosing not to indicate it, which was her mother's expression, according to what Bennett had told her, and which she had developed entirely on her own without knowing it was a family trait. They took the county road. Catherine drove carefully at first, not tentatively. The Jaguar deserved more than tentative, but with the deliberate attention of someone who has not done this before and is learning the shape of it. The car was responsive in a way that surprised her. It communicated through the wheel and the pedals with a directness that felt like conversation. After several kilometers, she let it have a bit more. Not recklessly, properly. The engine did what it had been made to do, which was to open into something that sounded and felt, she thought, like conviction, like an argument well made, like something certain of itself after years of silence. It's fast, she said, even going slowly. It always wants to go faster, Bennett said. Does it scare you? No, he said. He was looking out the side window at the fields, still brown from the winter but beginning, at the edges, to hint at something. It reminds me of something, he said. I can't. Dana, she said. He was quiet. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the road. She used to say that the best things made her feel slightly behind, he said eventually. Like they were moving at the speed things are actually supposed to move, and you spend most of your time artificially slowed down, and then something real comes along and you feel the gap. He was quiet. She said that about people too. Some people move at the speed they're actually supposed to move, and you feel it immediately. The road curved. The sky above the Bruce County fields was the specific blue of Ontario in March, thin and clean, and not yet warm. Do you still feel the gap? Catherine asked. Sometimes, he said. Less than I used to. They drove in silence for a while, not an uncomfortable silence. The kind between people who are inside the same moment and don't need to explain it to each other. Tell me something about her, Catherine said. That isn't in any story. She won every argument, Bennett said. Not because she was aggressive, because she was accurate. She would wait until you'd finished, and then she would identify the one thing you'd said that was slightly not true, the thing you'd let through because it supported your conclusion. And she would pull it out and look at it, and you would know immediately that she was right. Catherine smiled, looking at the road. Was it irritating? Constantly, he said. He said it with the specific tone of someone for whom the irritation and the love are inseparable and have been for so long that neither can be extracted from the other. She was also, he added, the only person who ever made Wren laugh until she fell off a chair. She had this thing she did with voices. Different voices for different things. She did a voice for the toaster when it burned things. What did the toaster say? He was quiet for a moment. Then, in a different register, lower and slightly affronted, I am doing my best with what I have, Catherine laughed. It came out fully, not contained. She let it. The road opened out. She had not been this far along the county road in a long time. It had been one of her grandmother's routes, she remembered now. A loop that brought you back along the lake through the small towns, Thornbury, Clarksburg, back to Harlow along the harbor road. She took it. The Jaguar took the curves with the assurance of something that has been doing this for 60 years and sees no reason to stop. They came back to the Brandt house in the late afternoon when the light had gone orange and low, the kind of light that makes southern Ontario look more like itself than it usually does, which is to say briefly, improbably beautiful. Wren was in the kitchen when they came in. She had migrated from the outbuilding to the house at some point in the preceding hours and was now at the kitchen table with Mrs. Beaumont's assistance, working on what appeared to be a detailed hand-drawn map of the monarch butterfly migration routes she had been documenting for her school project. The map covered most of one side of the kitchen table and had small illustrations at the waypoints. You were gone a long time, she said, without looking up. The road was good, Bennett said. Wren looked up briefly at her father, then at Catherine, with the specific assessment of a 9-year-old who has inherited her father's habit of reading situations without commenting on them, and her mother's habit of knowing things without being told them. Then she went back to the map. Mrs. Beaumont set the kettle on without being asked. This was, Catherine understood, not deference. This was Mrs. Beaumont making a structural observation about what the next hour was going to look like, which was that the four of them, 5, counting the map, were going to be in this kitchen for a while. The formal arrangement expanded in April. The Foundation's board approved the position at the April meeting. Catherine had prepared carefully for the conversation, anticipating the questions, and the board had surprised her by asking fewer than she'd expected. The work spoke plainly. The clock in Collingwood had been written up in a heritage conservation journal. The Owen Sound radio console had been the subject of a feature that had been picked up by 2 larger publications. The position was presented at the meeting as what it was, not as a corrective narrative, not as a charity of recognition, as a hire based on demonstrated capacity. The board had approved it unanimously, and one member, a retired civil engineer named Castellan, who had been on the board for 22 years and was known for saying the plainest possible version of whatever he thought, had said, "After the vote, the question I'm sitting with is how many other people we have in equivalent situations that we don't know about." Catherine had looked at him. "That's the right question," she said. She told Bennett about the meeting that evening. He was in the outbuilding, running a final check on the Jaguar before she moved it to the main garage for the season. She stood in the doorway with her jacket on the April evening, still carrying enough winter to be cold. "Unanimous," he said. "Unanimous." He looked at the Jaguar. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, Castellan asked the right question. "You know him? He brought a '97 Land Rover into the garage 2 winters ago. We talked for a while about systems integration. About his granddaughter, mostly. She was having a difficult year." Catherine looked at him. He said it with a complete absence of self-consciousness that she had come to understand was not a performance of humility. It was simply how he organized information about other people. The Land Rover was the vehicle. The granddaughter was the thing. She stepped further into the outbuilding. The Jaguar sat under the warm overhead light, British racing green and restored and present. "I want to drive it again," she said. "Good," he said. She ran her hand along the driver's door. "Not this evening, when the roads are better," she paused. "With you, if you're willing." He looked at her. She looked at him. He had the reading expression, the one that evaluated without performing evaluation. She had learned to hold still under it, not because it was scrutiny, but because it was attention, real attention, and she had lived long enough to know the difference and to value the second kind when she found it. "I'm willing," he said. May arrived with the particular logic of Ontario Springs, which is to say it arrived tentatively and then all at once. The snow went on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the fields were visible and damp and improbably green. By the following week, the lilac along the east fence of the Brandt property was beginning, and Wren had declared it her personal responsibility to document the progress in a notebook that she had designated specifically for this purpose. She came on Saturdays. She came sometimes on Thursdays after school, which had happened gradually, and then became, without announcement, a thing that happened. She had, by this point, read 11 books from the second-floor library and returned each one to its precise original location with the conscientiousness of someone who knows that borrowed things must be treated with respect. She had also, on one March Saturday, discovered the piano in the east sitting room, not the organ. The piano, a smaller instrument, an upright that Catherine's grandmother had kept for students and guests, which was in tune and in working order, and had simply been sitting in the east sitting room for decades. Wren had found it the way Wren found most things, through a process of systematic exploration that was not bounded by what anyone had told her was in scope. She had opened the east sitting room door, walked in, looked at the piano, sat down, and played a C major scale with 2 fingers. Then she had come to find Catherine. "There's a piano," she said. "I know," Catherine said. "Can I use it? Do you play?" "No, but I'd like to learn." Catherine looked at her. "It's tuned. You're welcome to sit with it whenever you like." Wren had returned to the east sitting room and been there for approximately 45 minutes, during which she appeared to be working through the logical structure of the instrument with the methodical focus she brought to everything she decided to understand. When she emerged, she said, "I need someone to show me what the notes are." "I can do that," Catherine said. This was the beginning of something that no one named for a long time. Saturday afternoons, the east sitting room, Wren on the piano bench with Catherine beside her, working through the basics in the particular way that teaching a child something real works, which is slowly and with frequent diversion into questions that are more interesting than the curriculum. Bennett came in once, stood in the doorway of the east sitting room for a moment, and left without saying anything. Later, Catherine found him in the kitchen making coffee, and she asked what he'd thought. He said, "She has Dana's hands. She never played anything, but she had the same hands." He said it looking at the coffee maker. Catherine looked at the window. After a moment, he said, "Thank you for this, for all of it." She said, "It goes both ways," meaning the work, meaning the foundation, meaning the Saturday mornings when the outbuilding was occupied, and the kitchen smelled like Mrs. Beaumont's soup, and Wren's notebook was open on the table, and something had been restored that Catherine hadn't known was broken until it began to mend. He looked at her. He had the open expression, the room he didn't usually show. She held his gaze. She had lived in this house for a long time. She had managed it and maintained it, and run her grandmother's foundation from it, and kept the organ waiting for 4 years, and the Jaguar under canvas for 12. She had been, for most of that time, the careful custodian of things she loved, without knowing how to use them. She was learning. On a Saturday in June, all 4 of them drove the county road, Wren in the back seat with her sunglasses on. She had decided some time ago that the Jaguar was the appropriate context for sunglasses, and her notebook across her knees, and Bennett in the passenger seat, and Catherine at the wheel. The windows were down, and the morning was warm, and the fields along the Bruce County Road were green in the specific, intense way of June, the color of something that knows summer is brief and is deciding to be fully itself while it has the chance. Wren said from the back, "It smells like the actual outside, not like car." "That's because the vents are original," Bennett said. Wren considered this. Then, "Will I be able to drive it someday?" Catherine said, "When you're ready." Wren said, "I'll be ready before Dad thinks I am." Bennett said, "That's a very reasonable prediction." The road curved toward the lake. The water appeared at the horizon, flat and silver in the morning light. Catherine drove. She thought about her grandmother on this same road, on summer mornings, in this same car, before any of them existed. The pleasure her grandmother had taken in the driving itself, the specific pleasure of a thing working as it was meant to work. The way her hands had looked on the wheel, steady, unhurried, certain. She thought about what it meant to carry things forward, not to preserve them unchanged, sealed under glass, but to carry them into the actual present, use them, let them become part of what is still living. She had the thought, and she let it settle, and she kept driving. The lake came up on the left. The Jaguar's engine opened on the straight along the water, unhurried and certain, saying the same thing it had always said. Wren leaned forward between the seats. "Can I open the glove box?" "What's in there?" Bennett said. "I want to know what's in there. That's why I'm asking." Catherine said, "There's a road map from 1968. Wren sat back. "Cool," she said, in the tone of someone for whom a road map from 1968 is genuinely cool. She was her father's daughter in this respect. She understood that old things contained information that new things didn't know they were missing. They drove the full loop. The Bruce County fields and the lake and the small towns, Thornbury, Clarksburg, and back along the harbor road to Harlow. When they came back through the gate of the Brandt property, and Bennett climbed out to open it, Wren climbed out with him and stood on the gravel looking back at the road they'd come from. "Dad," she said. "What? This is good." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. She walked back to the car. He held the gate. Catherine drove through, and he followed, and the gate swung closed behind them, and the Jaguar moved up the lane toward the house. The outbuilding was open. The afternoon light came through the slat windows the way it always had. There was a workbench against one wall with a cloth on it, and a set of tools laid out in the order Bennett used them. There was Wren's crate in the corner with a book on it, and a notebook, and a pencil she'd left here 2 weeks ago, and apparently decided was now permanently stationed here. There was, above the small window that faced east, a photograph that Bennett had asked if he could pin there. A photograph of Dana smiling taken somewhere in the summer, a lake visible behind her. He had asked, and Catherine had said yes, of course, and he had pinned it there carefully, in the corner of the window frame where the light came in the mornings, and it had been there since March. The house was warm. Mrs. Beaumont had made the orange soup. Wren knew this before she was through the door, because she'd smelled it from the lane, which she announced as evidence of a talent she was developing for soup detection specifically, a skill she intended to refine. They ate at the kitchen table, the 4 of them. Mrs. Beaumont, who had been invited to stay, and always said she wasn't sure she should, and then did. Wren talked about the monarch map and the piano and her theory about why June smelled different than May, which involved something she'd read about soil temperature and something else she might have invented. She acknowledged she couldn't always tell which. Bennett ate without hurry. He had the easy quiet of a man who is where he belongs and has stopped being surprised by it. Catherine looked around the kitchen at the particular disorder of a table being used, and people talking and soup going cold because no one is remembering to eat it. And she thought, my grandmother would have liked this. She would have liked him, she thought. She would have found Wren in 20 minutes and they would have been friends. She thought about the organ, the silence it had held for 4 years, and the morning it stopped holding it. The moment of the note, not a chord, not a song, just a single low tone reaching through the walls and into her chest. She thought, the house has been waiting for this, not for the repairs, for the sound. For the particular sound of a place being occupied by people who are actually there, fully there, not managing the space from a careful distance, but living inside it. She had been the custodian. She was learning to be something else. If anyone asked Catherine Brandt, years later, what the Jaguar had been about, what the organ had been about, what the autumn of a man on a ladder and a note through an open window, and 4 days of careful looking and a single low tone through the floorboards had been about, she would think about all the ways to answer. She would think about her grandmother's hands on the keys. She would think about a man sitting in a parking garage with the knowledge that something irreversible had happened and not particularly caring who saw him grieve. She would think about a 9-year-old with a monarch butterfly map and a theory about soup detection sitting at a kitchen table, saying things that were accurate in the way that children are accurate when no one has taught them yet to say the easier version. And she would say what she had come to know was the truest answer, which was this. The organ wasn't about the organ. The Jaguar wasn't about the Jaguar. They were about what happens when you stop treating the people who are already present as background to the thing you are actually looking for, and you look at them. Really look. The most important repairs, she had learned, are not the ones you call the specialists for. They are the ones that happen when you stop, assuming you already know what everything in front of you is worth, and you ask, instead, if you might be wrong.